1692 means we got shots fired 4:15 ASF.
It lines up very much with something that you yourself reported in the first few hours of the Las Vegas attack. Then Congress was briefed on this. Congress was absolutely briefed on this. And that's where I got it from U.S. Congress, that this guy had an anti-Trump animus, that he started stockpiling. Stephen Paddock, of course, we know that he was stockpiling rifles after the election of Trump. They went back and they tracked this. He had some handguns before, but the rifles, he started stockpiling them immediately after or in the days after the election of Trump. He attacked that concert because he viewed them as Trump supporters, the country music concert. And this information has been given to Congress.
If you are receiving this transmission, you are the resistance.
News so insane that I can't even believe it. But he can cover the waterfront, not just this report that's secret until now that was given to Congress, that was briefed. So we'll tell you as much as we can about the report. I'll just show the top of the document, and I may show some little pieces while we're here on air. But he joins us now. So Jack Posobiec, thanks for coming on with us, and good job on all the work you're doing there with the One America News.
Hey, Alex, thanks so much for having me on. You know, we had a big special this weekend, and one of the things that really came out and struck me with this report, and that report, and I've given you a copy of it, so you've now got it on your hands, and you correctly identified that that report is raw intelligence. That report is not stuff that's really been processed yet. There's a lot of stuff in there that may or may not reach certain levels that we're not willing to go into or not able to go into here on the news. But from what we can tell, just even from the very first page of it, the executive briefing that we've read, it lines up very much with something that you yourself reported in the first few hours of the Las Vegas attack. Then Congress was briefed on this. Congress was absolutely briefed on this. And that's where I got it from U.S. Congress, that this guy had an anti-Trump animus, that he started stockpiling. Stephen Paddock, of course, we know that he was stockpiling rifles after the election of Trump. They went back and they tracked this. He had some handguns before, but the rifles, he started stockpiling them immediately after or in the days after the election of Trump. He attacked that concert because he viewed them as Trump supporters, the country music concert. And this information has been given to Congress. I also have correspondence. I haven't released this yet, but I have it. Correspondence between myself and Congress and the FBI, where I can see, they sent me the documents that Congress has been asking and demanding the FBI tell them if they looked into this, tell them if the FBI even went in to looking into this situation. Did you investigate the fact that this guy was anti-Trump? Did you investigate the guns? Did you look into any of this? The FBI, as usual, is not responding to Congress, is not responding to their written letters, not responding to their emails, and Congress is starting to, frankly, get very frustrated with them.
So the bombshell here is that a group of intelligence agencies and other organizations, we're going to get into some of who the groups are here in a minute, briefed Congress on this, brought up a lot of intel that we separately have documented. We have this big data dump of raw intelligence that you've been giving because folks want this out, and that it did all point towards Paddock being extremely anti-Trump, which we've separately confirmed. So there you go. The FBI has buried the fact that this guy was an anti-Trumper. That there is bombshell, and shows you how many layers of the FBI are still political operatives of the Democratic Party.
Well, what's interesting, Alex, is actually that, you know, we talk about how it's different layers, but one thing that I've been told in the course of this from my sources is that right after this happened, keep in mind that this is still when Andrew McCabe was the deputy director at the FBI. And I've been told that McCabe actually demanded to maintain operational control of the investigation from the 7th floor of the FBI in Washington, D.C., that he demanded to have control of the operation as opposed to the actual field office there in Las Vegas in the first place. So McCabe, the same guy that we know is in trouble for his actions on the Clinton investigation, and then opening up the Trump investigation based on phony intelligence, the dossier. And now the same Andrew McCabe was involved in this essentially covering up or stopping the investigation into the Las Vegas shooter, not allowing investigators to investigate as far as they wanted to go. They essentially saw a dead body, said, we're going to pin it on this guy. This was the only guy involved. Case closed, let's move on. They did not dig into all of the very damning evidence that this case was done for because of political purposes. This was a terrorist attack that was committed for political purposes.
And I've been scanning over this. It fits into what our intel was, what the hostage rescue team told me the day after. Major Islamic connections, other shooters, they believe, being flown in. Some of the teams didn't show up. People got cold feet, did tell people, get out of here, you're about to be killed. I mean, this thing is leaking like a sieve. I actually feel sorry for the sheriff. He's been breaking down on TV, you know, obviously ordered to under national security to not get into this by the FBI. But that's rogue groups in the FBI of McCabe and their stay-behind networks. But I'm reading this. I'm getting to some of this on air. The attack was likely planned as a logistically and finance coordinated entirely by Stephen Paddock. Paddock may have anticipated the arrival of a fly-in team of additional shooters that would assist in the operational execution. However, the team of additional shooters appears to have not arrived in the numbers expected. It was also possible that additional members of the cell had not yet reached Paddock's suite when the security guard triggered a perimeter attack initiation. And they've even got who they think the shooters are and names and video clip, everything in there. This is really bad, man. This is really sick stuff. And we're going to get the sheriff breaking down and starting to cry, saying there's obviously other shooters. It's horrible. The people do great. And then later he's like, no one, only one guy. So this, and they still won't say what happened. There's a new article up on Infowars.com and Newswars.com that needs to get out there. IG bombshell, Clinton was never subject or target of FBI investigation, close quote. Remember, they said she was investigated, but they gave her a letter saying that she wasn't, and now it's confirmed again. We'll talk about that in the next hour with Jack Posobiec and open the phones up and get into Article 13, Article 11 that ends the internet as we know it. Even mainstream news admits it ends the internet. But I've actually read it now, the whole thing. And it's beyond that. I'm going to break that down coming up. And they're voting tomorrow. And the U.S. has been going under EU control. That's globalism. Jack Posobiec is in the studios there in D.C. of One America television network. And he was getting into this, until now, secret document put out by a particular intelligence group alumni organization. I'll just leave it at that briefed Congress, and then that way they can do it unofficially, as people obviously steal a lot of those agencies. And it's a pretty powerful info, but recapping and then getting into more of it, we have McCabe in control, deep state operative, ordering all this basically covered up, that the law enforcement believed Paddock had accomplices, and Congress has been briefed. So please continue with this information, Jack Posobiec.
Big question that everybody asked is, the same questions that we were all asking early on. And I know you've covered this, you've had people on who have covered this, but Congress is now starting to ask those very same questions. They're asking it very quietly, but some of them have come forward to the surface, like Congressman Scott Perry. They've essentially been asking, why was this someone who had so many guns? Why did he have so many ammo that wasn't used? Did he do this all by himself? This seems like at least a two-man operation. That's what the sources are telling. And one specific thing they bring up in the report, Alex, is the timeline of this thing. Now, to take us all back, the firing, so he gets shot by the guard, or excuse me, the guard tries to come up, he shoots at the guard, then he starts the shooting. That's 10 p.m. that evening. He continues shooting until 10:15. At 10:15, there's that two-shot sound that we hear, and then the firing abruptly stops. At 10:15, no police officer or security guard had entered the room. Nobody had gone to the door. He had no external pressure whatsoever at 10:15 to stop shooting. In fact, the police don't actually arrive for almost another hour. They wait for the SWAT team to come. And the reason they're worried coming in, they saw that cart outside. They worried about IED. They worried, did this guy have a bomb rigged up at the door? It was set to go. So they waited for SWAT to come in and make that determination. So why, at that point, 10:15, did he arbitrarily stop shooting when he had so many rounds left, 7,000 rounds in the room, when he had so many weapons in there? We know he had other materials, RDX, down in his car in the garage. We know that the airplane fuel tankers across the way, the jet fuel, that he was trying to shoot at those to take those out. He may have intended to use those explosives in his car to take out those jet fuel containers at the airport across the way. So why at 10:15, to bring it all back, does he just arbitrarily decide to stop shooting and end his attack when he clearly had follow-on operations. A huge red flag, and something that a lot of people in Congress are now starting to ask her questions about.
And of course, we know now the media never covers what happened. Never. They bring up every old shooting, constantly blame gun owners. They salivate over every mass event. But on this, when the Islamic connections and the gun running connections came out, they all dropped it like a hot potato.
Exactly. We've certainly seen from the left a massive program, a massive campaign, anti-gun campaign, certainly in the wake of Parkland and other shootings, that they've tried to use those shootings as political leverage to ban AR-15 specifically, to enact other gun bans. But after the Las Vegas shooting, you didn't really hear much other than banning those bump stocks. And bump stock to the shooter community is seen as more of a novelty. It's not seen as something that a serious shooter would ever use, because you can't really fire accurately with one of those things. So why is this never, it's not mentioned, it's not brought up in anything other than a list of major shootings is the only time you ever hear about it anymore. It was never used in these major campaigns that are pushed by the left, that we know. The Parkland, the March for Our Lives was done by a George Soros-tied promoter with the Open Society Foundation. So why did they never talk about Las Vegas in terms of gun control? It doesn't quite fit the narrative for some reason, and we're trying to figure out what that is.
Because the operation went sideways, everything points at that. You've read this report. You got the secret report Congress was showed. Get into the group, the organization, because obviously they gave it to you. They don't mind the name being out. And then why you think they gave it to you, and just a summary of the raw intelligence that's gathered here, but a lot of it very, very powerful.
Of course. So Americans for Intelligence Reform, it's headed by Brad Johnson, who's a 25-year CIA veteran. He's someone who was, as we call, a white hat, if you will, someone who never really got involved with any of the black ops that were going on. He knew about them, but he always stayed true to his mission. He always stayed true to the U.S. Constitution. And now that he got out, he's someone who has taken on the role of something of a whistleblower in the intelligence community, a sort of role that I find myself in occasionally, talking about what he sees the intel community doing now and calling against it. So they put this report together. He's the face of it. There are other names that are involved, certainly many, many names that are involved, but he's really the only one that's willing to come publicly, because a lot of these guys do still have security clearances. In some cases do also do cleared work as well for the agencies or contract work. So you're seeing the website right there. So Brad came on with me last weekend in OAN. We produced a 30-minute special. We're just essentially going through this report, going through what we were able to verify. And that was the anti-Trump sentiments. That was the stockpiling of weapons after the election. That was, perceiving the crowd, perceiving the target as Trump supporters. There were other indications that we didn't get into in our special report that are covered in this. And one of those big ones is the one that you heard Congressman Perry talk about 6 months ago on Fox, that there may have been an ISIS connection, and was certainly brought up earlier on when we know that ISIS took credit for the attack. However, no one was able, the question that a lot of people had was, this guy Paddock, he wasn't able to be tied to ISIS. So everybody was asking, what is the ISIS tie if this guy wasn't able to be directly tied? And that's where the girlfriend they were thinking may potentially come in due to her international travel, the money being sent overseas, the fact she was overseas but seems to have had foreknowledge of this. And the FBI, to some extent, is investigating this, but to another extent is really trying to hold that main narrative of this guy doing the entire thing by himself together, even though we've even seen indications in some of the police reports that the police are investigating whether or not multiple associates were involved.
Well, I was told by folks involved with the FBI hostage rescue team who were there that there was all this foreign travel stuff, that they'd both been in the Middle East, that they thought it was some type of gun running deal gone bad. And then the FBI came in and shut it all down a day after. But we told people that the next morning. I got the information, then I got to go ahead to say it on air because there was a cover-up going on. And now you see all the evidence pointing towards that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in terms of that. Unfortunately, because these guys are on the outside looking in for a lot of these things, they're only able to use the information that they get in terms of, just like with you, someone tells you something, points you in a direction. We don't have access to the same databases, law enforcement databases that the FBI would, and they're not making any of their findings public. They certainly have only released tiny tidbits of information regarding this thing, only small portions.
Oh, they're really hoping it just goes away because they know what really happened.
Yeah, they don't want us talking about this. They don't want us bringing this up. They want it to be doled out in little drips and drabs, spoon-fed to us. They don't want us looking at this as people who are intelligence veterans, as people who were in the shooting community, who understand how terrorism works, and to look at this through the lens of counterterrorism, which is something that they certainly see. Maybe not international, maybe more in active domestic terrorism in at least the case of Paddock. But was there supposed to be more is a big question that now the real breaking news on this is that Congress is starting to ask these questions as well.
All right, Jack Posobiec, we're going to go to break.